I'm the Director of Advocacy and Outreach for the ACLU of Illinois, and we're very pleased to see all of you tonight. We are honored to host this voting rights forum in the company of the League of Women Voters of Lake County and Progressive Democrats of America. As I mentioned, we are the ACLU of Illinois. Before we get started and before I introduce my panelists, I had a couple announcements for you. First off, this event is part of a series that we are doing called Defending the Targets of Intolerance. And it's a series that we are using to focus on the ACLU of Illinois' work defending various individuals and groups of people who are targeted by laws and by governments and singled out based on who they are or what they believe. And so throughout the year we've been holding forums and events on those topics. So at the beginning of the year we were holding a number of events focused on reproductive rights and the way in which women and also LGBT individuals can be singled out for intolerance in our laws and in our communities. This quarter we are looking at voting rights and free speech rights, so we're holding this panel on voting rights in conjunction with the League. And coming up in the year, you're going to see us out here in the Round Lake Beach area talking about the way in which people can be targeted for intolerance based on their religion or lack of religion, based on their racial and ethnic groups. And then later on in the year, we're going to talk about how we're all targeted by laws that diminish our privacy and allow the government to exercise surveillance over all of us. So look for those events. We'll email you. We'll send out a lot of information, but I hope we'll see you at some of those events in the future. The second announcement I wanted to make, and you'll see it on the back of your program card, the next event we have coming up is this Sunday, and I really want to extend a warm invitation to all of you to join us. We're going to be marching in the Chicago LGBT Rights Parade, Pride Parade, and it's such a fun event. Our entry is always really family friendly, and this year we have special reason to celebrate because about a month ago we launched a case seeking the freedom to marry for gay and lesbian couples around Illinois. And a number of our client couples who have been together 15, 20, 48 years in one instance will be marching with us in the parade, and we are encouraging the crowd to say I do with the ACLU. We're handing out candy ring pops, and it is going to be a great time. So if you're interested, please sign up online. You can get there pretty easily by train, and it's going to be a good time. Lastly, I would be remiss if I didn't mention we are having a deal on membership right now, and I know that I sound like I am the broadcaster for public radio, but just for today, you can get a t-shirt and an ACLU membership for $20, and it's a special deal, won't be on very long, so do check that out on your way out. Without further ado, I want to introduce our two esteemed panelists. First, we have Adam Schwartz, who is a senior staff counsel for the ACLU of Illinois. He graduated from, received his JD from Howard Law in 1995, and he has been with the ACLU for 15 years. He specializes in First Amendment law, voting rights, and issues with law enforcement. So we're very pleased to have him. And next over, we have Rosemary Heileman. She is on the board of directors of the League of Women Voters of Lake County and is recently retired, and so we hope you are enjoying your retirement. So the way this will work is I'm going to start each of them off with an introductory question, and then once they've both finished their introductions, we'll open it up and hopefully have a very wide-ranging discussion on a variety of issues. So to start us off, Adam, would you like to talk about the challenges you are seeing to the right to vote in Illinois and around the country?
Before I launch into things, I just want to say thanks to all of you for being here. We really appreciate your coming out on a Thursday night to join us. It's a special honor to be sharing a table with the League of Women Voters There are really, I can't think of any organization in America that has done more to encourage people to register to vote. And I'm teaching my daughters about the history of women winning the right to vote and the role that the parent organization to the league played in that struggle. And it's a thrill to be sharing the stage here with the league. The right to vote is our most important right because it preserves all of our other rights. And for our American democracy to work, everybody's vote has to be counted. And we have to make it as simple and straightforward as possible for everybody to be able to show up on Election Day and cast their ballot and have their vote counted. Unfortunately, there is a nationwide organized movement which is seeking to contract the franchise and to make it harder for the most vulnerable Americans to register to vote and to appear on Election Day and cast their vote and have that vote counted. There are laws being passed in state after state on all kinds of issues that I'll speak about that are making it harder to show up and have the vote counted. There are projections that there might be millions fewer votes cast and counted in the 2012 election compared to the 2008 election, in part because of these barriers to registering to vote and voting. And sad to say, it's not as though these are randomly distributed across different groups of Americans, but rather it is the most vulnerable among us who will not have their votes counted, including poor people, racial minorities, people who are disabled, elderly voters, and new voters who are in their 20s and who are students. I'm going to give special focus to the requirement that people have a photo identification in order to vote, but there are a number of other barriers in play also, which I'll speak about briefly at the end of my remarks. So in 2006, there was no state that required a photo ID in order to show up on Election Day and have your vote counted. Today, there are 16 such states, just 6 years later. And many of those require a government-issued photo ID. And some of those are choosy about which kind of government-issued photo ID. And there are bills in dozens of additional states to pass the same kind of law. Unfortunately, there are many millions of Americans who don't have a photo ID. Study after study shows us that somewhere around 10% of all Americans don't have such a photo ID. So for example, the Brennan Center, a group in New York, commissioned a survey, and it found that of 1,000 voters, 11% of them did not have a photo ID, and that of the voters who are African American, it raised up to 1 in 4. Another group, calls itself Rock the Vote. They try to register people in their 20s to register and vote on Election Day. They found that 1 in 5 voters who are between 18 and 29 do not have a photo identification. Many of us do have, and it's hard to understand why other people don't. The reasons are at least twofold. Number one, for many people, it costs money. So you need, for example, a certified birth certificate in many states to get a photo ID that's issued by the government, and that costs money. And number two, it takes time. So for some people, you have to go first to one government agency, get your papers, then go to another government agency and submit your papers. For many Americans who are vulnerable and living at the margins and struggling to make the money and take care of their families, spending money and spending their time is very hard to do. It is really the modern equivalent of a poll tax, a horrible Jim Crow tradition that you could not vote on Election Day unless you paid money. Now, fortunately, the poll tax has been illegal in America by constitutional amendment for 50 years. But a requirement that you spend your own money to get a certified birth certificate as a condition to getting a photo ID, as a condition to casting your ballot, is a modern-day poll tax, and it should not be allowed. I'd like to play a video now of a ACLU client in a lawsuit we have just up the road, I think that way, in the state of Wisconsin. Ruthel's story, I think, is exemplary of the kinds of barriers that people face to getting photo IDs, and the danger posed to millions of Americans of being disenfranchised as a result of the photo ID requirement.
This is not a voter ID bill. This is voter suppression. It's voter disenfranchisement. This is voter confusion. This is voter
By this time,
restriction.
Mr. President, the senators in the outer ring are done with the session. It's going to be easier to carry a concealed weapon than it will be to register to vote in the state of Wisconsin. That's a simple fact.
The question before the House is concurrence. The clerk will call the rolls. You're out of order. Take your seat. Continue the roll call.
We have
19 ayes, 5 noes. The bill is concurred in. Senator.
Radical. Remember those words. Today, Republicans in the state Senate rammed through their highly restrictive voter ID bill. The measure requires voters to show a voter ID when they're heading to the polls, and you know who it's going to hurt. It's going to hurt the young, the poor, minorities.
I've went all these years without a birth certificate. Well, now I start reading in the newspaper, you know, that the new was going to be that we had to have a card, and that there was 5 items that you had to have to qualify. So then I took my baptism certificate and marriage license, social security card. And I went down to the motor vehicle department and got, I might just will say, thrown out. I told them right out that I did not have a birth certificate. And she didn't say anything that, you know, that I couldn't go on or anything. And then I went to the next station, and when I handed my baptism certificate to her, she just took it and left it lay on the table and picked it up and handed it back to me, and she said it isn't legal. I enjoy it. I really do, because you find out all what's going on. You know what the village has to put up with, and what the expenses are, and what you can expect, and everything. My salary from the day that I have started I've been purchasing Christmas decorations. I've always enjoyed Christmas decorations. That's what we do at Christmas, is go from place to place and view the lights. That's our fun time. I could get a birth certificate for the $20, but then after that, if I don't still know if it would be what the motor vehicle department wants. I've been told that that my father's last name is spelled wrong on it. My mother's first name is spelled wrong. So I don't know exactly how much of it is right or wrong. So then if there's any other changes that they want, well then we have to start paying. And I was told it could be up to $200 that we might have to pay for me to have a correct birth certificate. So I may lose it. I may never vote again. I don't know. I hope not. But I mean, I just don't agree with it. I think it's foolish.
So I want to say a few words about 2 other ACLU plaintiffs in that Wisconsin lawsuit. One is named Carl Ellis. He is a U.S. Army veteran. Unfortunately, he lives in a homeless shelter. He has no savings. He has no income. He does have a veteran's identification card issued to him by the U.S. government, and it shows his face and it shows his name. That is not good enough for the state of Wisconsin. They will not register him to vote and allow him to vote with that identification. He cannot get a certified birth certificate because he does not have one and he cannot afford one. Another ACLU client is Eddie Lee Holloway Jr., who is disabled and unemployed and homeless. Due to a decades-old clerical error, the face of his birth certificate calls him Junior Holloway, as opposed to his true name, Holloway Jr. And because of this mistake in his birth certificate, he cannot get a photo identification, and he cannot vote, even though his proper name appears on his federal Social Security card, and his proper name appears on a photo ID issued to him by the state of Illinois. So not only do you need a photo ID, not only do you need a government-issued photo ID, but you need a special kind of voter-issued photo ID, which many, many people do not have. Now, the supporters of this ID requirement will say that they need this to prevent voter fraud. Now, no doubt, voter fraud is a very bad thing. It can undermine the integrity of an election. But the truth is, voter fraud in the form of somebody walking into a polling place and pretending to be someone they are not, and signing their name on the voter rolls as they collect their ballot is an exceedingly rare crime. Study after study shows us that it occurs very infrequently. So, for example, the United States Election Assistance Administration has found that of all the different kinds of voter fraud, this ID fraud is the least common. And when the Justice Department under George W. Bush undertook a 5-year program dedicating many, many hours of attorney time to identify and prosecute people for this kind of fraud, they found only a few score people had done it nationwide over a 5-year period. And most of them were not aware, as they voted, that they were not allowed to vote. So this is really a solution looking for a problem. And it's not surprising that this is so rare. I mean, you have to walk into a polling place, know that you're facing 5 years in prison for signing your name, commit this crime in broad daylight in front of government officials and the police officers who are in a polling place. And if you do it alone, you're going to have at best the most marginal possible impact on an election. And if it's a conspiracy large enough to actually affect an election, then there's a very great danger that the conspiracy would be unmasked. So it really is not justified. Now, fortunately, across the country, there are groups like the League and like the ACLU that are pushing back against these photo ID requirements. The first line of defense, of course, is to stop these laws from being enacted in the first place. So here in Illinois, every year, for at least 5 years in a row, there has been a bill to require a government-issued photo ID on Election Day. And the ACLU, working with other groups, has been successful in defeating that bill. The second line of defense after such a bill is enacted is to bring a lawsuit to challenge it. There are at least 4 different theories under which these kinds of laws can be challenged in court. The first is for voters to bring a case in federal court alleging that the photo ID rule violates the Equal Protection Clause of the U.S. Constitution. This provides that if the government is going to divide people into 2 different groups, for example, those with a photo ID and those without, when it comes to something so important to our democracy as a right to vote, the government must show a good reason for doing so. Now, unfortunately, the ACLU in 2008 lost a case like this in the U.S. Supreme Court called Crawford versus Marion County. But fortunately, that decision says that we're free to come back with a better set of evidence, showing that discrete groups are being burdened by this photo ID requirement. And that's exactly what the ACLU is now doing in various lawsuits. The second kind of lawsuit is under the Federal Voting Rights Act of 1965. This is the historic law enacted by Lyndon Johnson in response to the demands of the civil rights movement that the federal government take forceful action to protect minority voters from disenfranchisement from state and local voter suppression. One of the important parts of the Voting Rights Act says that state and local government cannot adopt a voting rule which has the effect of disparately impacting different racial groups without regard to the intention behind the voting rule. So in Wisconsin, in the lawsuit that you just saw the video about, the ACLU is alleging that the photo ID rule has a greater burden on minority voters than white voters because minority voters are far less likely to have a photo ID, and therefore that it violates the Voting Rights Act. And we have submitted expert proof based on the state's own data, which shows black voters are twice as likely as white voters to lack a photo ID. The third kind of lawsuit is to go to state court and bring a challenge under the voting rights guarantee of a state constitution. Now, many states on many different issues have protections of individuals that are even stronger than the protections in our U.S. Constitution. So the League of Women Voters, for example, brought a case in Wisconsin in state court under just such a theory. And a month ago, won a very great victory from a state trial court judge. Hopefully that victory will be protected on appeal. The fourth kind of lawsuit is one that's not brought by the voters, but is brought by the U.S. government. Another provision of the Voting Rights Act identifies states that have historically sought to suppress minority votes, and it bans those states from changing their voting rules without getting permission first from the United States Department of Justice. This is called pre-clearance. So when Texas adopted a photo ID rule, they had to ask the U.S. government for permission to implement it. And a few months ago, the U.S. government said, no, you cannot, because under your own data, which we have analyzed, we see that Hispanic Texans are twice as likely as white Texans to not have a photo ID, and this would disparately burden minority voters, so you can't do this. And so now Texas has to go to a federal court to try to win its right to impose the photo ID rule. The ACLU and other civil rights groups are trying to intervene in that lawsuit on behalf of minority voters. So I've been talking so far only about the photo ID rule, but there's lots of other rules. I'm going to touch briefly on one that is near to the heart of the League. I'll let Rosemary talk in greater detail about this. 1 in 4 Americans who are eligible to be registered to vote are not registered to vote. Now, it should be the job of the U.S. government and the states to find every one of them and make it as easy as possible for them to register to vote, but unfortunately, we have not done that. And so private groups like the League and Rock the Vote and others have done the courageous and critical work to our democracy of going out and finding these people and helping them register to vote. They deserve praise. They deserve medals. Instead, what some states have done is made this job of registering people to vote harder. So in Florida, for example, they passed a law that says from the time that the League gets somebody's signature on a voter registration form to the time that they give that form to the state government, no more than 48 hours can pass. And if more than 48 hours pass, the person who collected that signature has to pay a stiff fine. And so tragically, the League did the only thing it could do, which is end its voter registration operation in Florida because they could not subject their volunteers to this danger of paying these kinds of fines. I'm proud to say the ACLU has filed a lawsuit on behalf of the League and similar groups alleging that this kind of rule violates freedom of speech. The right of one citizen in our democracy to speak to another includes the right to say, hey, are you registered to vote? What can I do to help you register to vote? Here's the forms. And a federal judge recently has agreed with that theory. It will be appealed. Hopefully we will win that case on appeal. There are many other examples of ongoing campaign of voter suppression. It is hard for many people to register to vote, so there are laws that are same-day registration. You know, you come in on election day, you register to vote, and you vote that day. Those are being repealed. For some voters, it is hard to vote on a Tuesday, and so there is early voting. Here in Illinois, I think it goes, I'm sure the League knows this better than I do, but there are, I think, weeks before an election where you can early vote. Well, in many states, they're pulling back on early voting. And so it goes on and on. When our country was founded, we the people was just white men with property. And in response to courageous struggles by a series of civil rights movements, it has expanded to people without property, to racial minorities, to women. And now we are a nation where we the people means everybody. And the civil rights struggle of previous generations was to expand the right to vote. And now, one of the great civil rights struggles of our era is to maintain the right to vote and protect this victory. So I'm looking forward to hearing from Rosemary, and after that I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Adam. So turning now to Rosemary, how does the League of Women Voters work to defend voting rights?
Okay, well, I'll give you a little background on the League of Women Voters first. As Adam mentioned, who's very knowledgeable about the League was started in 1920 by Carrie Chapman Catt, our founding mother, which is 92 years ago, and the organization grew out of the fight for women's suffrage. We have continued to work for voting rights ever since that time. The League is a nonpartisan, I want to make this disclaimer, the League is a nonpartisan organization, which means we do not support any party or candidate. However, we do collaborate with a wide variety of organizations when we share a common interest. We are happy to be here with the ACLU on this very important issue of voting rights. Voting is a citizen's constitutional right, not a privilege. So that's a little background on the League's formation. I am a board member of the League of Women Voters of Lake County, and also a member of the League of Women Voters of Deerfield, Illinois. In Lake County, there's a Deerfield League, a Highland Park Highwood League, and a Lake Forest Lake Bluff League. And members from those three leagues come together as an interleague organization to be on the Lake County League, and we address different issues throughout Lake County that are outside the boundaries of those communities. So as today we're here in Round Lake with you, we do voter registrations at other spots throughout Lake County, and we are interested in finding more members in Lake County outside of those communities that could work through our Lake County League and cover needs and help people throughout the county. Voter registration is one of the favorite things that leaguers do, and we work as deputy registrars through the Lake County Clerk's office. As a deputy registrar, you can register people. I'm just trying to get back more from that. Is that all right? As a deputy registrar, you go out throughout the county, and actually we can register anybody in the state as a representative of the county clerk's office. And the clerk is happy to give this privilege to members of certified civic organizations, of which the League of Women Voters is one. And there are other organizations that also can certify registrars. And this is an activity that we feel very strongly about because of the things that Adam has mentioned. People are often reluctant or unsure of how to register. What does it mean? Often there's a lot of movement in the United States. People move from state to state. We have people who have come and become naturalized citizens from other countries. And the registration process may not be evident to people. They may not know which is their which township or which office they should go to register. And if we have a registration drive at a common meeting place, such as a public event, a 4th of July day, or at the library, or in the high schools is where we've been going lately, because the students are turning 18 as seniors, and now that 18-year-olds can vote, many of them are very happy to be registered to vote at that time. So we feel this is one of our most important activities, and leaguers enjoy it. There's something about the look on the face, especially of the young people, when I always make them take that oath. There's an oath on the bottom of the registration form, and you could just read it and have the person sign, but I make them repeat after me just for that feeling of pride, and it often brings me to tears because they really are thrilled that they are now voting. And when we're at the library, for example, the parents come in, and maybe the parents say, oh yeah, I'm registering in Deerfield, of course. Many of the people are registered there to vote. It's not something they're unfamiliar with. But the children, as they come into the library, oh, Mommy, what's that? Oh, when you're grown up, when you're 18, you'll register to vote too. So even if we don't have that many people registering that day, again, it's putting the idea that this is what citizens in the United States do. They register so that they can vote. So we have a great deal of pride in that. Another thing then, along with that, that's a function of the League is now what do you do now that you have that vote? And we do have many issues that we as an organization have studied and have taken positions on. And so we do lobby, we write letters, we make phone calls on these particular issues as they come up in our local legislatures or in the federal government. But we also want other people to do this, even if they don't agree with us. We want everyone to know how do you go about affecting government, because the people in government are affecting us. They're affecting how much we pay in taxes, they're affecting whether our boys and girls are going to be going off to war, it's affecting the environment and the air we breathe. Everything in our lives is affected by these people that go off and represent us in the legislative bodies. So I was very happy that just recently this little pamphlet was put out by the League of Women Voters of Illinois, and I printed up some copies on my home computer for you today. And I think it's an excellent example of the type of outreach that we like to do as an organization. Making your voice heard, how you can influence government decisions. So regardless of what the topic is that you're interested in, this gives you a little guide as to first how the bills are passed through the legislatures, and then gives you tips for communicating with your legislator, gives you a few tips about lobbying by phone, by email, gives you some resources for online services that will tell you what legislation is being considered and the status of it, how to track a bill. Probably you want to pick a few special bills that you're interested in, because we know there are thousands introduced all the time, and some information on the back where you can reach the League of Women Voters for additional assistance. So these kinds of publications are the kinds of things that we like to do. Leaguers might go to a civics class and give a talk about voting and registering and bills and how to follow and how to influence your legislature and legislators. And so this is our nonpartisan aspect where we really want everyone to feel that they have a stake in what's going on, instead of that feeling of kind of disenchantment or disgruntlement or disaffection that seems to be the only reason we can understand why people wouldn't take advantage of this most precious right to vote. And I think that if people feel that they are involved in talking to a legislator, or if that someone is responding to what they are saying, that will get them more involved for the future. Whereas if they don't take that first step, then they don't know where to begin. And so it's a little bit leading the horse to water and then letting them enjoy the adventure of being active in the public life. So those are the things we do in the homegrown town. We also have observers that might sit in at your local community board meetings. We, the Lake County League of Women Voters, have started observing the Lake County Board lately. So we go every month and we sit in on the meetings and we take notes, and if there were something that came up that affected that had to do with one of our positions, then we'd know about it, and then maybe we'd meet and say, you know, we should speak to this topic that's coming up to the Lake County Board, and we'd check our position, because we always go by our positions, and we might make a statement, or something might come up at the Lake County Board for which we do not have a position. So maybe we say, well, maybe we need to do a study on this topic, whatever it might be. And so the league might do a study on the local, it would be called a local study. And we'd do a local study, and then if we came up with some position that we felt on this particular local issue, then we could speak in front of the Lake County Board. The lengthy style of consensus that the league requires to achieve positions sometimes discourages people who want quick action and quick decisions. But it is what has made us more respected when we do take a position on an issue, because people listening to us know that it was not arrived at quickly, that it was studied. Either if it's a local issue, it was studied in depth at the local level. If it's a state issue, every league in the state had an opportunity to participate in a study, to come to consensus. It's not a vote, it's a consensus, and to put those ideas into the state league, and the same at the national level. We work by consensus. So it's a lengthy process, and once our position is arrived at, people feel confident that that is really what the leaguers feel. It is not often that we have to get involved in lawsuits. That's really, out of our comfort zone, I would say, because we are more focused on local issues and on issues and making people aware and spreading information. So to go to court means that the leagues in those states and those cases have felt so strongly that something is amiss that they are taking that step. So in Wisconsin, there was an injunction by the state court against that law. Again, we don't know what will happen to it. In Florida, we were, as you said, plaintiffs against the registration restrictions. And I will say, we just found out that there's a bill on the desk of the governor that is going to shorten the early voting days in Illinois and also cut back a little bit the grace period for voter registration at the county office. And also there are some new requirements for us in Illinois. We have to, when we take registrations, if we send them by mail, we only have 2 days to get them postmarked. And then if we bring them in person, it's 7 days. So they've already given us a few more restrictions than we have had before here in Illinois. That's new to me. And in Minnesota, the state league itself has taken on some of the restrictions that have been passed in that state. And their website is full of information also. So it's a painful time because we've made such great strides in past years in making it easier for people to register, and our own Lake County clerk really has a lot of opportunities for people. They have curbside service to vote if you want to call ahead of time, and you can drive up and they'll bring out the ballot for you to do in your car. There are all kinds of services and opportunities for people to register and to vote in our county that may be restricted with these kinds of regulations. Now I have a story. I wanted to tell a story. I was so serious, but I was looking at Ruth Ann there in your story, and I know people say, "Come on, what's the matter? Why can't you get a photo ID?" And first of all, I was thinking not only it's a birth certificate, but then if you have a different married name, you need to get your marriage certificate too. So that's another cost and another bit of research. But now here I am. I'm speaking in public. I'm in a group. I've been on TV a few times. I work most of my life. I drive. I'm a widow. I'm old. I do all kinds of things. But it was time for my driver's license to be renewed, and they wanted me to take the test. I was freaking out. I thought, oh my gosh, because 4 years ago I got one of those certificates, where you just had to send in the money and you got a sticker and you put it on the back. So I was like, okay, good. So it had been 8 years since I'd gone to the driver's license facility. Okay, well, first of all, as you get into the Medicare club, first thing first is it's not only driving in winter that's bad, is that you're in terror of falling on the ice, so you don't want to slip. So anywhere you go, basically when you get home, it's like, I made it alive, so all right. But mine was in the spring, so it wasn't a matter of weather. But I thought, well, first I have to bone up on those rules because I don't know how many feet you have to stop before you get to a stop sign. And you can't miss one sign. You have to know all the signs. So first I went to the DMV to get the brochure with the rules of the road. And they didn't have them in the outdoor section, in the entryway. They had them in Polish and Spanish, so I had to go inside, and I had to wait in line, and the guy was very nice. He said, oh, yeah, we've got some in English for you. Okay. So it took a whole day. Now, I have a master's degree. It took me a whole day to memorize that book. Boy, I was really afraid that I was going to go blank on something. So now it comes time to go to the DMV. And I'm thinking, oh, my gosh, what if I don't get the answer right? And then I've got to go all over again. So I allowed enough weeks so that if I did flunk it, I'd have time to come back again and take it another time. And then I'm thinking, now I got to go to that lady. And 8 years ago, I had just lost a lot of weight. I was down to 150 pounds. And now I got to look someone in the face and say, no, I weigh 200 plus pounds, and, put that on my card. Now, that's not easy for anybody to say. And then what if someone starts coughing? What if someone has perfume and I start coughing, and then I got to go to the bathroom, and then I'm in the middle of the test, and what am I going to do? And this was a major predicament for me, who does a lot of things. Now, suppose I'm poor. Suppose I stutter. Suppose I have an accent. Suppose I live in a neighborhood where they're shooting a lot. Suppose I'm not sure how to get to the DMV because actually I don't drive, so I have to ask someone, and I already ask so many people for things for me. And this is one more thing I have to ask them, and they might have to sit there and wait. And the guy, my picture might not look like me, and I might not have the right information, and then this friend is going to have to bring me back home and bring me again for a state ID. This is just ordinary people, not even living out in Texas, whereas I was on the computer doing all this research the last few days and getting my brain full of information. There are areas in Texas, they mentioned a lot because they've had some rules there, where there are hardly any DMV offices in the whole state, and the ones, in certain sections because it's so big, and in Indiana either. And those that are there, if you can get to them, are only open during working hours of the day, and they have no weekend hours, and they have no holiday hours, and they don't stay open late. How do people do that if they don't have a car available and TV and trains and services? It is a much bigger burden than people think, just to get an identification. So that's my I was debating whether to tell that story.
Thank you.
We're glad you told that story.
I thought
Thank you. So now we'll open it up for questions. Does anybody have some questions for Adam or Rosemary? Or I got a whole list here, so I can keep going, but you're the folks that came to the event.
My name is Max Maxwell. I am a member of the Progressive Democrats of America. At our last chapter meeting, which is Northeast Illinois, two of our members, it turned out, were sitting right next to me from McHenry County. You mentioned that in Lake County, the Lake County clerk does an exceptional job of training and certifying deputy voter registrars. Many of us in our Progressive Democrats of America chapter are also deputy voter registrars. And the topic came up at the meeting, and this lady and her son, who were from McHenry County, sitting next to me, said, how do I become a deputy voter registrar? And my thought was, because I live in Lake County, it was so easy for me to get registered. I said, oh, I'll help you with that, not knowing she was from McHenry County. It turns out that in Illinois, according to Illinois statute, as you mentioned, Rosemary, the county clerk is the registrar for the county. They are the single person charged with training deputy voter registrars. Illinois statute also stipulates that certain people, such as precinct committee persons, are automatically deputy voter registrars, but they must be trained by the county clerk. I tried to find out for this lady. I didn't know what I was taking on when I said, oh, I'll help you with that. I tried to find out for this lady and her son how they could both become deputy voter registrars, and I ran up against a blank wall. I couldn't find any place in McHenry County where that was happening. I called the League of Women Voters here because I have a lot of respect for what you do. They immediately got me in touch with the league in McHenry County. And as far as they know, they're the only organization authorized to train deputy voter registrars. So we have a type of voter suppression in Illinois that is dependent upon the county clerk. And I think that needs to be addressed, and maybe that's something the ACLU could look into and undertake. No question.
I was not aware of that, and that is something that we should look at. I mean, it really goes to show that more needs to be done by private groups and by the government to register Americans to vote. Again, there's 1 in 4 who are eligible who are not registered to vote. And instead of moving forward towards better registration, there is a nationwide movement in the opposite direction to make it harder to register people to vote. So really, we're moving in absolutely the wrong direction on this score.
Does anybody else have a question? Sure, the gentleman there in the back, and then you.
Hi, I guess I'm Adam. Hi, everyone. Directed towards Adam. You, when you first started answering your question, say that you want to make voter registration more simple. And I guess my question is where you would like to go to make it more simple. Because when we first, in the 20th century, it was very simple. Al Capone said, vote early and vote often. So I guess, is that, are you trying to get back to where there's very little voter registration, or I'm sorry, very little needed to vote, or are you trying to get just where it's, you register one time, you don't need a voter ID, or are you just trying to go opposite of what these laws are trying to do? I guess is my question.
I think I understand your question, but if I'm not answering, please, ask a follow-up. I think that there are a lot of points of contact between regular people and the government. And one of them, for example, is driver's license registration. And so a law passed by Congress, I think in '93 or so, the National, probably the League can name this more, it's the National, well, it's commonly called Motor Voter, but there's a longer name to it. It basically requires Department of Motor Vehicles to facilitate voter registration. And so that's, I think, a very good step forward. But there are all kinds of other points of contact between government and voters. Just for example, it's wonderful that the League is going to high schools and approaching 18-year-olds and saying, hey, you registered to vote. Why isn't the high school doing that? Why is it that you can graduate from a high school without someone putting on your desk the voter registration form that if you want to, you can fill it out? Now, you raise the horrible tradition in Chicago of voting early and voting often. And again, voter fraud it undermines our democracy. We don't have one person, one vote if people are stuffing the ballot boxes, or if people are throwing out the ballot boxes, or if people in some kind of systemic way are being allowed to vote multiple times. So we certainly have no problem with rules that say on election day you only can vote in one place. Or, as I understand how early voting works in Illinois, if you show up once, there's some kind of computerized system where you are prevented, later on that day, going to a different polling place and voting again. And those kinds of aggressive rules that ensure fairness and prevent fraud, we're 100% in favor of. In some cases, we need more of it. But again, the particular form of voter fraud of someone walking into a polling place and saying, hi, I'm John Smith, and getting John Smith's ballot and voting it for him differently than John Smith would have voted that ballot is an exceedingly rare form of voter fraud, which does not justify the blunderbuss of this photo ID requirement.
Thank you. I think this lady in red had a question.
Just before I was going to say, you would have to know how he signed his name, too, because they do check your signature. Okay.
Hi, Reverend Jacqueline Ziegler, and I have 3 questions, and that is, perhaps, Rosemary, you'd be the person to answer that. What is the status of the number of people who can vote in Lake County but aren't registered to vote? Okay.
I'll look for that while you ask another question, because I printed up a bunch of things off of that website in anticipation of this meeting, and I might have something like that. You want to ask another question while
Sure.
I look?
What is the status of the lawsuits that you spoke about in Wisconsin, my home state, Florida, and I think there was one other, and I don't remember what it is, is it they're going to be challenged again? And if that's the case, under how are people allowed to vote? With the old law, or are they in limbo? Or I'm assuming the old law does take precedence, but there's a lot of confusion with people I know asking about that.
So in the judicial system, whether it's federal court or state court, there's different layers of judges. So you've got the trial judge, the appellate judge, then the Supreme Court. And in Wisconsin, in the league's lawsuit in state court, the trial judge, who happens to be Dane County, where Madison is, issued an injunction against enforcement of the new photo ID rule. And so that was before the recall election. So my understanding, and hopefully Rosemary correct me if I'm wrong, is that the photo ID rule was not in place during the recall election. And unless the appellate court takes some kind of action to reverse the trial court, the photo ID rule will not be in place either at the time of the general election this November. But it often, at least in federal court, it'll take you a year, maybe 2 years, to work your way from the appeal through a decision by the appellate court. And there's really no way of knowing how the state appellate court or the state Supreme Court will address that matter. Hopefully they'll reach the right result, but no one knows. In terms of Florida, the ACLU in the registration case for the league, again, won a ruling in their favor from the state court, or excuse me, the federal trial court judge. What I am not sure of is whether they enjoined the 48-hour rule.
Yes, they did.
Was it because I was afraid it was just the fine? It was the 48-hour rule?
Yes, they enjoined that.
48 hours still holds, but they don't get fined.
No, it sounds like they enjoined the 48 hours too.
They enjoined the 48 hours.
So that means they can't have that rule either.
Oh, okay.
Here's what I found on I call her Willard because I spend so much time on her. I call her Willard because I spent so much time on the website lately. I feel like I know her personally. On the Lake County Clerk's website, all it says here as far as numbers that you asked about, as a result of growth in Lake County and implementation, here it is, here's the answer to your question. The National Voter Registration Act, that's the motor voter. The number of registered voters in Lake County has increased to an all-time high of over 405,000 voters. We process an average of nearly 1,200 new applications each week. So that doesn't give a percentage, but evidently the clerk's office is doing very well and people are registering.
So how many is that in terms of
I
how
don't
many potential people are we still losing?
Oh, I don't know. I don't know what the population in Lake County is. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah. We know that. You know, there are still people who think that if you've registered to vote that you'll be on jury duty, and that hasn't been true for many years. The jurors are taken from the driver's license lists. So we still run into people who, think that means they'll have to be on a jury, which is still a civic responsibility and should be a duty that's agreed to. So some are resistant for that reason. But I think most people are just unsure. I think they just need the opportunity. Their lives are busy and hectic, and on the list of, if you think, I was trying to think about all these topics today. And I was thinking of difficult times in my life when I had something to do that was technical, but something had interrupted my life and I didn't get around to it. And if you think of 5 people that you know of, coworkers or neighbors or someone you're in a group with or a church, if you can picture just 5, I'll bet one of them has some child who's ill or some husband who's ill or some terrible thing financially, or they lost their home, and this is part of life that goes on for so many people, and right now it's much worse because of the economic situation than it's been for a long time. And registering to vote and the anticipation that it's going to be a nuisance and a problem and a difficulty is just not on the top of their list. They have too many, even though we know that some of these problems that they are suffering could be ameliorated if government had different, if things were different, they still just have so much energy for so much that's going on in their lives, and that's just not at the top of the list. And how are you going to argue with somebody for that? But if you make it available, if you come, look here, I'm the deputy registrar, here's the form, I can turn it in for you, you're here at the market, take 5 minutes, and then people, they pause, and they often are happy to, because it's right there in front of them. So that's why we like to go out.
Yeah, the third one is just around the high school students when you get them to register. If they go to college in state or even out of state, but they have their home address in where they grew up and where they registered from, are they able to vote at home, or because I keep hearing that's a problem or something.
They're really not supposed to vote both places.
Right.
They kind of have to pick one. And the Lake County Clerk and in Illinois, there is such a thing as a temporarily absent student program enrollment. And a student can enroll with the clerk, and the clerk will send. Now there's a new rule. You have to apply for an absentee ballot, but they will send them a note and say, okay, there's election coming up. Do you want to apply for a ballot? And the student will apply for the ballot, and then they will send them an absentee ballot at their school. So there is a program like that available for students who are away at school, and they can still vote as long as they're considering their Illinois home their home address. But they can't just go do both.
Thank you.
Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Just want to say two things about college students. Well, three things really. Certainly, the ACLU agrees that they should not be able to vote in both places, because that would be, the early and often, which is so, fraudulent and violates one person, one vote. That said, number two, it should be very easy for college students who are studying distant from where they grew up with their parents to choose which venue they want to vote in, whether they want to vote where they're expecting to go home, or whether they want to vote in the community where presumptively they're going to be for 4 years and perhaps afterwards. And part of this nationwide movement that we're talking about tonight, which is dedicated towards narrowing the number of people who are going to vote in elections, is laws that make it harder for college students who are from out of state to vote in their adopted state during the years that they're there. And the ACLU and other groups are opposing laws like those. And number three, the Wisconsin voter ID law, which requires not just government-issued ID, but narrow kinds of government-issued ID, excludes the IDs that are issued by public universities. And so thousands of public university students whose principal form of ID is the one they carry around issued by their university cannot use those to vote in the state of Wisconsin. And so when we say that young people are among the vulnerable groups who are being excluded from voting, that's the kind of thing that we're talking about.
I'm Carol Shook, and I'm looking at this map. With all the states that have passed these measures, are you working your ACLU working in all of those states? And what is the chance? We have a short time till election. What is the chance that these cases will be heard in time for the election?
The ACLU, fortunately, is an organization with 500,000 members, and we have employees and including lawyers in every single state in the country. And big affiliates like us here in Illinois, we can work independently. Smaller affiliates in some of the states that are most likely to pass these kinds of anti-voting rules, they get backup from a ACLU unit known as the Voting Rights Project, which is based in Atlanta. And so we are very busy all across the country fighting these rules. If you're interested, our website, and we've got some materials outside on the table. It looks like you have it there. There's like a 4-page graphic that kind of explains in fairly straightforward terms everything that I'm saying this evening. Some of these rules in some of these states we are succeeding at beating back, but many of them we're not. And so I think it is, I am sad to say, I do think that the supporters of these rules to some degree will get their way in the general election in 2012, and that some number of Americans who otherwise would have voted will not be voting. And that's a very sad thing, and that should make all of us redouble our efforts to push back against this movement.
My name is Lenny. Actually, I have several questions, so if somebody else wants the question, just let me know, because I don't want to take up everybody's time. What are you doing as the ACLU and stuff to ensure that the military get to vote? I know last year there were some problems. We were in Illinois where the ballots got sent out late, so some of the military votes weren't going to get counted. In 2008, there were some problems in Virginia with being able to get and not count, and some of the military votes didn't get counted in Virginia as well.
I think that it is very, very important that members of the armed forces who are, not just serving our country but putting their lives on the line for our country have the fullest and fairest opportunity to have their vote counted. And while I'm not an expert in this area, I do understand there to have been flaws in this system in recent years in terms of getting the ballots sent out in a timely manner to make sure those votes get counted. I do not know what the ACLU has done on that particular subject in other states. You mentioned Virginia. I'm sad to say that I don't have enough. I don't have personal knowledge to answer that question, except to say that I do believe that everything should be done to make sure those votes are counted.
It pays to print everything you find. This is, the League of Women Voters. Every year in Illinois we have an issues briefing, and we have specialists on different topics. So Mary Lou Agard is our issues specialist on election laws. So in January of this year, she presented this report, and she listed a summary of some of the things that were passed in the legislature, including, and just little notes that she has here, but evidently this is in response to what you're describing. Ballots for this is for Illinois, the Illinois legislature. Ballots for military personnel must be available from local election authorities 46 days prior to any election. So they must have responded to that, criticism with a 46-day window. So.
The next question I have is actually a little bit of a multi-part question. I know you have a lot of lawsuits. Can you tell us how much the ACLU actually spends on the lawsuits? And the other question is, wouldn't it be cheaper, since there are some cases of voter fraud, wouldn't it be cheaper for the ACLU, or what are you doing to work with state legislators to actually fix the process to eliminate the voter fraud so we don't even have these problems altogether, so you can secure the vote, basically the whole voter integrity ID. What are you doing on that front besides just the lawsuits, and kind of how much money are you spending on the lawsuits? And do you know of any groups, actually I ran into one a few weeks ago, the reason I'm asking this question, part of this question is groups that actually help people get IDs as well that require them. I ran into a group just a few weeks ago that actually do that at their church, and they actually bring in the people and actually pay for the IDs, so there was no cost to the IDs. Just kind of, I know it's a multi-part question there, so.
I think there's three parts there, and I'll try to be sure to address all of them. So number one, the lawsuits that we bring sometimes are very expensive. So beyond the money we raise to pay our staff lawyers, and while we are paid at the very low end of the Chicago area law firm salaries, we are paid as professionals, and that does require a great deal of money to run. And then once you're starting to pay for experts, you're talking about out-of-pocket costs. And so if you're going to take 1,000 or 1,000,000 pieces of data about voters in Wisconsin and analyze it, you're talking 5-6 figures easy of expert costs out of pocket in addition to your salaries. And so litigation can be very expensive. In terms of what we do in the legislature to stop fraud, we are supportive of all kinds of laws on the subject of voting. We oppose others on the subject of voting, including fraud issues. So just for example, in the wake of the 2000 general election, where the infamous hanging chads affected the outcome of that contest, The ACLU, as were many organizations, were supportive of shifting to voting machines that didn't have this problem. In fact, here in Illinois, we were supportive of the transition to electronic voting. But there were concerns that electronic voting was susceptible to fraud, that bad guys working for the companies or outside the companies who make them would hack their way in, and every 10th vote would be changed from Democrat to Republican, and the code would be written so it would undo itself and be invisible. And so what do you do about that? Well, to stop that kind of fraud, we lobbied for a requirement that electronic voting machines have a paper trail. So I don't know if anyone has had the experience of voting electronically, but before you're done, you have the option of looking at a piece of paper spit out and confirm that the piece of paper accurately reflects your vote, and if it doesn't, you can cancel the whole thing and start again. And so that is an example of an anti-fraud voting rule that the ACLU lobbied for. No doubt there are other kinds of anti-fraud voting rules that are in play that we could lobby for as well, and we do. I think your third question was, there are groups out there who are doing the direct service, as the League does, of going to people and saying, hey, you need a photo ID. What can I do to make it easy for you to have a photo ID? Pay for it, do the paperwork for you. That's wonderful. That's not what the ACLU does. We are a group that is focused on policy, and we don't do direct services. And that's not to criticize or undervalue direct services. It's just not what we do. Again, it's the greatest of honor to be at the table here with a League who is, I suppose, both doing the policy work and the direct services work. And that work of voter by voter, helping them is so wonderful, but it's not what the ACLU does.
Okay, actually, I answered another question I had, but the other one, you're talking about Texas, and I made a couple notes. You said there's a number of people that aren't registered to vote. In that number of people that aren't registered to vote, how many of those, is there a statistic that tells you how many of those people don't want to register, like we were talking about with the jury duty? And then how many of those people are not eligible to actually vote, i.e. non-citizens, or in many states, I'm not sure about Texas, I know some states have a rule that if you've committed a felony, then you've lost your right to vote. And is there a statistic showing those numbers as a percentage of the non-registered to vote in Texas?
I think there's several things in there. Let me start with felon disenfranchisement. The view of the ACLU is that once you've paid your debt to society, done your time, when you get out, your voting rights should be restored. And we believe that for a number of reasons, including people are more likely to live the straight and narrow and not recidivate if they are engaged with their community, and voting is a way you engage with your community. Perhaps more importantly, when we talk about felon disenfranchisement, there's 2 million people in prison right now. We're off the charts by a factor of 4, I think, compared to any other country in the world of people behind bars, and they're disproportionately people of color. And so one can go on and on about the racial debacle of felon disenfranchisement. But so that I just wanted to hit on that. The 1 in 4 figure that I have seen comes from the Brennan Center, and the denominator in their figure is eligible voters. Anyone who is not ineligible because of felon disenfranchisement, or they're not citizens, or they're not too young, or whatever, they're not in that figure. Of the 25% of people who are eligible to register who are not eligible, who are not registered, I assume that there is some portion who don't want to register, either for who knows why, a reason of ideology. It doesn't even matter. This is America. If you don't want to vote, you don't have to vote. I think it is safe to say that a very large portion of the 25%, all other things equal, would like to vote, would like to be registered. But I cannot speak to which portion of that 25% does not want to register.
Yeah, actually, another question while we were talking about felonies. I'm not sure if Rosemary is aware of this or not, but there was a recent case here this past year about a deputy registrar who was actually passing out gift cards to 18-year-olds to actually register to vote, and they weren't prosecuted. What would the ACLU, how would you see that? Should all cases of like that it's basically a case of fraud, getting people to register, especially high schoolers, to register by bribing them. Basically, it was a Class 4 felony in Illinois. What are kind of your feelings on that? I'm sure probably Rosemary probably wants to answer that question or doesn't want to. I don't know. Right. It wasn't. It was not you. Actually, it was a sitting school board member in here in Lake County.
Okay, I don't remember the details of that. And they were not prosecuted?
No.
Oh, well.
The state's attorney basically found they committed at least 2 felonies because they had 2 kids that said yes, they gave them a gift card for that, but they didn't find a broader range, so they decided not to prosecute at that point.
Oh, I didn't know about this.
They were up for re-election, basically, is my...
Wait, you said this was a deputy registrar.
Yes. Yes, she was also a sitting school board member and was up for re-election. There's a lot to that story. Yeah, that's correct.
But it was given giving 2 McDonald's coupons to somebody, and she is no longer a registrar, as I understand it. There are a lot of things we don't know, I'm sure.
Actually, there's Culver's and they were gift certificates.
Yeah, they were gift certificates. So.
Which is the same as cash.
Would you like to respond, Adam? Or?
Yeah, I think that there are rules for how to register, how to be a third-party register of voters, and people should follow them. And if they don't like them, they should try to change the rule, or they should file a lawsuit. But to just unilaterally do your own thing and give out gift cards, that's irresponsible. And I don't understand. I don't think that any of the major national groups like the League have been associated with that kind of conduct.
I think the lady up here in front had a question.
I just want to make a comment about what happened to me and how it was a long time ago. It was a bitter school board election here in Round Lake, District 116. I signed for my people. Last name Shook. Sometimes I do a cursive S, sometimes I do a printed S. I like to be creative. Oh my S on Shook was wrong, and my name got crossed off the petition. And of course, I don't know how many others, but my candidate wasn't allowed to run in the election. I do see a lot of checking on these things. I think sometimes we're worried about the bad man under the bed on these issues, because there's a lot of checking, and when you go to vote, I always make sure my S is right.
So this was a petition for someone to be put on the ballot?
Yes, and you challenge, and they check it over, and the rest of my name, the E was perfect, everything. But I did my S wrong. I was naughty.
I don't know about that. What is it?
Well, I think that, the underlying structure makes sense. I mean, the ballot is not infinite, and there can be negative effects of the ballot getting too long. If there's too many people, it's too confusing, too many races. And so a requirement of a certain number of valid signatures is clearly appropriate. It shouldn't be too big. It shouldn't be unequal. You need 1 million for, alderman, but you only need 100 for mayor, let's say. But structurally it makes sense. And there ought to be a way for regular people to check it out. And a lot of groups are very aggressive in Illinois about, knocking their opponents off. My understanding is that there is a way to challenge it that involves, going to the voter and filling out an affidavit, but, in practice doesn't happen. The ACLU had an experience with this this process of ballot signature review. I'm sorry that your signature was knocked off. Allie, you might know the answer from that process. Isn't there a way to get an affidavit from the voter and get the one that was knocked off added back in?
Yes, but I believe the individual voter has to go to the office, fill it out.
We just don't know.
Yeah, it's complicated.
Actually, I do know actually the law has been changed now, because I did actually just run for office, and that law has been changed now where they have to ascertain the voter intent, and they have to come to the voter to make sure. Now, that couldn't happen again because of the new laws here in Illinois. It's been changed.
Oh, interesting. So it's harder to knock
Yes, it's harder to knock names off the ballot now.
Oh, okay.
But not in referendum.
Oh, is that right?
The rules are still different for referenda, but not for elected office. Did we have another question?
Well, it was kind of a question comment, but at one time my daughter went to vote and she was asked to show a photo ID. This is a community that's not too far away from here. And she said, I thought I didn't have to show photo ID. And the judge said, well, I can ask, but you don't have to show it.
Really?
Yeah. So do you know?
I was just talking to a woman who works in our office who is an election judge in Chicago. And she told me that the Chicago Board of Election Commissioners has a policy that the election judge may not ask the voter on election day for a photo ID. What I do not know is whether or not the Chicago Board is doing its own thing in that regard, or whether or not it's implementing a statewide policy. Certainly, it's I think counterproductive and bad for inclusion for an election judge to feel free to ask the question and discourage voting that way.
Well, she didn't show it, but it is McHenry County. It wasn't Chicago.
Now you do know that you do show a photo ID for early voting. So, no, okay, so because that is in Illinois.
Is there anyone else? Oh, ma'am.
Actually, it's for the League of Women Voters, and it's more of a help than anything. As far as getting a photo ID right now, gosh, you got to go to the pharmacy counter to get Sudafed now, and you have to show a voter ID, or not a voter ID, an ID, and you have to sign your name on something and everything. Getting a job, I don't know about that so much. Maybe a birth certificate at the most, but and then there's other things like Drano and I don't even know what else that you have to have an ID of some sort. Just as a suggestion, you may want to try to, tell people to, encourage them to get a voter ID or a voter card just to be able to, or even just an ID period, just to be able to do some of those simple things. I mean, you have to show an ID to cash a check and stuff. So, just an idea.
As the gentleman with you mentioned, there evidently are some groups that have taken that on, and it's an interesting suggestion. That might be a service project for organizations to at least get information for people, because instead of just fighting all the time about it. I did have an experience. I was a teacher, and I wanted to do a simple science experiment. It had to do with sawdust. So I went to Home Depot to get, like a little bit of sawdust just to put in the water. I forget what the experiment was. They could not give me sawdust because it wasn't too long after the Oklahoma City bombing, and they were prohibited from letting me have any sawdust. I said, you got to be kidding. I'm not going to blow up anything. I just want to see if show the kids how it floats on water. And they could not give it to me. And so I found some other way. But yes, odd things. Of explosive, I know, yes. Yeah.
Are there anybody else with a question? Sure.
This is more of a philosophical question, which you might not want to respond to her in that. And beyond not allowing people to vote, what do you feel? Is there a philosophical discussion going on? Why is this happening? What is it about? Is it a growth to meritocracy, plutocracy, or what's the thoughts behind that? And again, you might not want to respond to that. So.
I'll tell you, I won't respond because it is. If you read the articles, it's a very politically charged response, and so we'll try to stay neutral as to who, what, where, and why, and we're mostly focusing on making voting accessible to the people.
I think that when figuring out what people are thinking, it's almost always best to start with what they're saying. And what the supporters of these rules frequently are saying is they want to stop voter fraud. And so, in my response, I try to, take that on its face and treat it as an argument and respond and say, well, here's why you shouldn't be worried about fraud in this circumstance. And even if there is some marginal amount, it's vastly outweighed by literally millions of Americans, potentially not being allowed to vote. I would add, and this is just an objective fact, that when these bills are voted on, it tends to be Republicans who support them and Democrats who oppose them. And I think it's not any great speculation to consider the possibility that the voters who would be excluded by these kinds of measures tend to vote Democrat. And that may be that may or may not be a part of the motive for each of the parties to tend to support one side or the other.
Thank you.
Just kind of a comment going off that. I go to school in La Crosse, and it's a very populous student town, and there's, I want to say 15,000, if not more, students there. And the main representative, U.S. congressman that works there, I happened to intern for, it was a good time, is largely, that's his district, is the UW La Crosse, Viterbo, and the tech school, and that's 15,000 voters, which is the majority, and most of us vote Democrat. So from my eyes, the whole voter bill, the voter ID bill in Wisconsin, is aimed at taking away students. If you look at Madison, the representatives that are in that district are eliminated when you don't have 20,000 votes for you. If you look at the other universities that are in Wisconsin, those all votes are eliminated. So and in Florida, it's a very heavily retirement community, and those citizens tend to usually vote Democrats. So if you make them change their voter IDs, so I guess I was agreeing with your point.
That's what I spend $25,000 a year for.
We thank you for your investment.
More than a question is just an empowerment statement. I think the ACLU is right to represent anyone that has any kind of thought that they may have been taken or misjudged or treated badly about voting. And I think that's also dangerous to have any individual have to rely on the generosity of strangers in order to get them what they need in order to vote. It is a fundamental right to be able to vote, and we should be making it as easy as possible for people. I'm also a very intelligent person, worked all my life. I have a doctorate, I know how to get around, but I'm amazed every day at how fear interferes with people being able to access what is their right. And it's not that they aren't intelligent or they don't know, but they don't want to look stupid. They don't want to ask the wrong question. And there are places and venues that every citizen, every person in a community knows, a school. They all know about the school. They usually all know about a library, post office, though who knows what's going to happen with post offices nowadays. But there are places where you should be able to get information and to be able to go and say, I want to register to vote without depending on somebody setting up a table in a store or having to go to a county seat or having to travel in any distance. And anything that any of you can do to help aid that and make that a national issue, not a state issue, has my full support. And I want to commend you on everything that you're doing. Thank you.
Thank you. Actually, there is a law in Illinois, and it has started to take effect a little bit. Schools really are supposed to have a registrar. The idea is that maybe it would be a school secretary that would be available also in the evenings when parents came for open houses or whatever, but also is available in the building. Whether schools have all, I used to go to a number of schools, and some of them had that sign, this is a place of voter registration, but most kind of gave me a blank look. Libraries also are supposed to have a staff member who is available, presumably is whatever her working hours are, but at some varied times for people to go there. And I actually asked Mrs. Hillander about this a couple of years ago, and she said yes, but that's one of the many things that they've been trying to promote in Lake County. So that is a state requirement, actually, but it hasn't been completely implemented yet, nor very well publicized, except for that one school I know that has that sign. Thank you for your kind remarks, and I want to thank the ACLU for getting this program organized and for including us and inviting us. We are proud and delighted to be a part of your program. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
There's actually one last question. You're not off the hook yet, and it's the most important question that's going to be asked here today, which is, we've heard about all these challenges to the right to vote. We've heard about all these issues people have getting registered. What can we here do to defend the right to vote? How can we help?
Well, the little handy-dandy booklet that you have on your seat has a lot of hints for contacting your legislators and following bills and so forth, so I really recommend that. And secondly, if you are interested in joining the League of Women Voters, we would love to have you as a member. There are some membership forms on the table outside, or you can talk to me. I have extras here, and we would love to have you join us and work on these different projects. Thank you. Thank you for asking.
Just to echo that, I think one of the most important things that people can do to support the right to vote is to join an organization that supports the right to vote. And the League is one, and the ACLU is another, and we would love to have everyone's help.
So is Progressive Democrats.
I'm remiss for not saying that, since you're a co-sponsor of the event.
And the last thing I would add is that we regularly at the ACLU send out emails to our action alert list when the bills that come up in the legislature, as Adam mentioned. We need the help of folks like you calling and writing your legislators to let them know that voter suppression is not appropriate and not what we want in Illinois. And so we really encourage you to be on our email list and to take those emails seriously, because when we send them, it's because it's coming up for a critical vote. So in any case, I want to first say thank you to our two wonderful panelists, Adam and Rosemary. So thank you, guys. And secondly, would you also join me in thanking Ed there in the back and Maud here for helping out at the event. Thank you all so much for coming. There are registration forms for both the League and the ACLU out in front. And as I mentioned, with the ACLU, you get this awesome T-shirt that Maud is wearing. Special deal. So thank you all. Have a really great evening. I'm sure our panelists can answer questions in person for a little bit as we're packing up. So, and have a cookie on your way out. Have a great evening.